I just finished packing a 20-foot U-Haul truck. I don't really like driving such big vehicles, but it will probably save us hundreds of dollars on the move. Mia was going to follow me in her car with the kids. We were supposed to be in town by midday. I was looking forward to this change. Although I loved living in Stanhope, I knew Mia couldn't wait to get back to the city. She grew up there and went to school there. I knew most of her friends, and they were all mostly good people. Mostly. There were a few stories that I think she kept from me. I knew she had a bit of a turbulent past, but I figured that her experiences had made her who she was, and my experiences had done the same for her. Over time, I had grown to love her. I knew that. But every now and then I would second-guess my decision. Because of that and one specific incident, we almost didn't get married. The circumstances of our marriage were not ideal, but let's start at the beginning. I think that will make the story easier to understand. I graduated from St. John's University with a degree in business. The summer after my freshman year, I interned at Northern Forest Products as a broker's assistant. NFP sold lumber around the world. The company's headquarters were on the St. John's campus. I enjoyed learning about timber, building materials, and the different customers who bought our products. The work was fast-paced. In addition to the products and customers, I learned several important things about business. First, it's a high-stress job with goals, deadlines, and the need to get things done. I also realized that those who do well in this job make a lot of money. After graduating from university, I started working at NFP as a sales intern. I worked for an experienced broker named Larry Belinsky. Larry was a large, slightly disheveled man who knew the forestry business well. For the first 6 weeks, Larry and I worked side by side in the office, and I learned a lot. After those few weeks, Larry rarely showed up at the office. I quickly realized that you didn't have to be physically present in the office to run a business. Most of the time, I was just talking to people who were selling timber all over the world. Over time, I took on more and more of Larry's work. I never knew exactly how much he earned in commissions, but I heard enough to know it was a lot of money. Meanwhile, I was earning an intern's salary. In this business, as I soon learned, the most important thing is to tell the truth and earn people's trust. Later, I realized that this lesson applied not only to business, it also applied to relationships. We'll come back to that a little later. Shortly after my first full year on the job, Larry began to show up less and less at the office. As far as I could tell, he was having health problems. He had divorced his third wife a little over a year ago. Despite his income, he lived in a mobile home in a park on the east side of Stanhope. He may have been a good lumber salesman, but his personal life was a mess. Between the office and Larry's home on the east side of Stanhope was the Timbers Bar. It was not uncommon to see his old Chevrolet Tahoe parked crookedly in the Timbers parking lot at any time of the day. On Monday, after working at NFP for almost 2 years, I arrived at the office where the atmosphere was subdued. The news reached me fairly quickly. Larry had suffered a stroke and was now in a rehabilitation center. No one knew what the long-term prognosis was, but it was assumed that he would not be able to return to work. In the meantime, we had work to do. On Monday afternoon, I was called into the sales manager's office. We talked briefly about Larry, and then the conversation quickly turned to business and plans for the future. "We're not going to transfer 100% of his orders to you," he told me, "but you've done a good job, Patrick, and you'll get most of them." I was glad they considered me successful enough to take on at least part of Larry's business. In fact, since I started working with Larry, our business had grown. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I realized the financial implications of my new status. My first monthly commission check was just over $14,000, and that wasn't even for the whole month. When I got home that Friday, I quickly did the math. Even in the worst-case scenario, I figured I would be making a nice 6-figure sum. I was excited, exhilarated. I also felt a little guilty toward Larry, but I didn't really know him that well. I needed something to celebrate. I called my friend Tim Paris. Tim was still in college, working on his master's degree. "Price, what's up?" he answered. He always called me by my last name. I explained that I wanted to take him out to dinner and a couple of drinks to celebrate. "Celebrate what?" he asked. I said I'd explain later. We decided to meet at Poncho's, an upscale Latin restaurant with a great bar. It was one of those places you couldn't afford in college but always wanted to go to. On Friday night, the place was packed. There were professionals and recent college graduates looking for their first jobs. I told Tim about my new lucrative business at NFP. I didn't give him any exact figures, but I hinted that I expected to make good money. Price, he began. You know I'm getting my MBA in finance. Last year I did an internship at a finance company and they offered me a job starting in June. We need to develop a financial plan for you. And we started discussing my plan. As we talked, the restaurant became more and more crowded. We were standing at a high bistro-style table with stools, with 4 people sitting at it. A large group began to approach us. While Tim and I were discussing stock indices, I felt someone touch my shoulder. I turned around and saw a tall, striking dark-haired woman, actually a girl, smiling and looking at me. "Are you using this chair?" she asked, still smiling. I'm not usually a very sociable person, but I'm not an introvert, I'm just stoic. But today, buoyed by my financial success, I was in high spirits. "Yes," I replied, "but I'd be happy to give it up for you." I smiled back at her. She thanked me and moved the stool half a meter away, still remaining quite close to Tim and me. Tim chatted briefly with a thin blonde sitting at the table opposite the one I was talking to. The tall girl smiled at me again, sat down on the stool, and turned to her friends. A few minutes later, I asked the girl sitting next to me if she wanted a drink. They agreed, and the 4 of us started chatting. The evening passed, we drank and talked. I learned that the dark-haired girl's name was Mia Durant. She graduated from Stanhope State University with a degree in marketing and worked at a local advertising company in Stanhope. The more I talked to her, the more attractive she seemed to me. We left Poncho's and went to a small bar called Pinocchio's. It was a little quieter there, so we ordered some appetizers and had a few more drinks. The night was getting a little hazy from the alcohol, and at some point I realized that Tim and the blonde had left. "Well," Mia began, "it's getting late. I live just a few blocks away," she said to me. I gallantly offered to walk her home. We approached her door and she turned to enter the code. We entered the apartment. Soon we were in the bedroom and cuddled up together. After a while, we fell asleep. It must have been several hours when I felt her stir. "Good morning," she said. We both got dressed, chatting about the previous evening and smiling at each other from time to time. When we left the house, we sat down at a table and had some coffee. Eventually, I realized it was time to go, but I enjoyed spending time with them. I learned that the blonde girl's name was Lisa Shea, and she was a good friend of Mia's. I also learned that Tim and she had spent some time together. He didn't sleep all night. "I'm engaged," she explained. As if that made any sense. I'll have to check with Tim, I thought. "Well, I guess I'll go look for my car," I said to the girls. Mia walked me to the door and kissed me gently goodbye. "I had a really good time with you, Patrick. Write me," she said. I left happy and satisfied. I was still excited about my earnings. I was in a good mood. I thought about Mia for a few days before contacting her. As I said, she looked great, she was fun to be with, and she was good in bed. But I decided that I didn't really like casual relationships. If I was going to invest energy in a relationship, I needed to be sure it could be long-term. I called her in the middle of the week. "Hi," she said. "How's Patrick?" I could tell she was happy I called. "I'm glad you called," she continued. "I was hoping this wasn't just another one-night stand." Another one? I thought. And I pushed those thoughts to the back of my mind. We agreed to meet up the following weekend. Over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other, mostly on weekends, usually staying at my place, sometimes at hers. A typical date consisted of dinner, a few drinks, and then back to my place. Sometimes we went out with friends, mostly Mia. I saw Lisa, Maya's neighbor, a few times and decided to ask my friend Tim how the first night went. One day, I called him on my way home from work. "Hey, Pris, how's it going?" Tim replied cheerfully. "Still making good money. Now that I'm working full-time at investment counselors, we really need to make a plan for you." I agreed, and we chatted for a few minutes. Finally, I brought up the evening when we met Mia and Lisa. I asked him what happened, blaming alcohol for my inability to remember. "Oh my God," Tim began. "You looked like you were having a good time with that dark-haired girl." I agreed. Anyway, we got there. It was fun, but almost too much fun. After we had fun, Tim continued, she told me I had to leave. Her boyfriend, or fiancé, didn't know what was going on, sometimes came home late, and wasn't in a good mood. Things were definitely getting interesting. I didn't know the fiance, but I knew who Mitch was or something like that. I got dressed and left a minute later. I wanted to look for you, but I caught an Uber. Crazy night. What happened? He asked. She said something else weird to me. I kind of forgot about it. What? I asked. When I was leaving, she said to me, and stay away from Mia. Last time Mitch stayed over, she almost had fun with him. It was all a blur. Then I heard her laughing and figured it was some kind of joke, Tim finished. I thought about it for a moment. Could that really have happened between Mia and Lisa's boyfriend? It seemed unlikely. Most likely it was just a joke, as Tim had suggested. I told him I had a good time but didn't go into details. He quickly changed the subject. Hey, the Stanhope Stars are playing at home in a couple of weeks, and the company has tickets. Want to go? Of course, I agreed, and we'd arranged to go to the game on Saturday. I loved September soccer games. The weather was usually nice, unlike the rainy and cold November games. Mia and I continued to date and everything was going well. I have to admit that deep down I was a little worried about Mia. As far as I knew, she wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary, but some of the things she said about her lifestyle made her seem a little more wild than I was used to. The following weekend was Labor Day. I asked her if she wanted to go camping with me. I told her how much I loved nature, hiking, fishing, and sometimes rock climbing. You mean, she asked uncertainly, sleeping in a tent? I assured her that she would enjoy it, that I had all the necessary equipment, and promised that she would have a good time. She agreed with noticeably less enthusiasm than usual. The weather was perfect that weekend. We set up camp in a state park with more modern toilets rather than portable toilets. We cooked on a camping stove and built a fire in a fire pit in the evenings. By about the middles of Saturday, she began to let go of her doubts and really enjoy the outdoors. That evening, sitting by the fire, she asked me what we would do the next day. Have you ever been fishing? I asked. She hadn't, so I told her about a secret fishing spot I knew. We'll have to walk a few kilometers, but it's worth it. I told her about it, and she readily agreed to try it. The next day, we got up early. We took our backpacks, fishing gear, water, and some light snacks with us. I had already fished in this creek before. To get to the fishing spot, we had to cross the creek at a certain place. When I fished there, I had never seen anyone else in that part of the creek. We got ready. I took Mia's rod with bait and showed her how it worked. Above the clear pool where I suggested she try, there was a large flat rock. I told her I was going to go a little further down the creek, but that this pool would be a good spot for her. Over the next hour, I caught several fish. One of them turned out to be a good-sized rainbow trout. I had to explain to Mia that we had to release the fish we caught. I was already a little further upstream when I heard Mia's excited cry. I caught one, she shouted. She had caught a medium-sized trout. I took a picture of her with the fish. She was very excited. That evening by the campfire, Mia leaned her head against my shoulder, hugged me, and whispered in my ear. You know, Patrick, she began, I'm starting to really like you. I smiled, feeling the same strong feelings for her. It seemed to me that our relationship had reached a turning point. It was a good weekend. We usually saw each other at least once a week. That week, we decided to go out for dinner on Wednesday night. As we sipped our wine, we talked about the upcoming weekend. She mentioned a party on Saturday night. It's at Mitch's friend's house, she told me. Mitch Markham was engaged to her neighbor, Lisa Shea. I had met him a couple of times, and he seemed like a normal guy with a big ego. He looked like a frat boy. I also knew his friend who was throwing the party. I don't know if I can make it, I told Mia. There's a soccer game on Saturday, and they usually go pretty late. Oh, I see, she said. I really wanted to go to the party with you. I said I'd try, and we moved on to other topics. On Saturday, Tim and I went to the game. The Stars were playing a strong team, and the stadium was packed. We had a couple of beers before the game and another one during halftime. Surprisingly, the score was still tied in the fourth quarter. The other team was leading by 3 points and scored the winning touchdown with 1 minute left in the game. Their quarterback threw a pass toward the sideline, which was intercepted by our defender. The accurate pass was slowed by a bounce, and our defender snatched the ball out of the air and returned it for a brilliant touchdown. The Stars defeated their opponents. The entire stadium, except for a few opposing fans, went wild. Tim and I sat among the jubilant fans for a while longer. Finally, we began to slowly leave the stadium in high spirits. Despite the late hour, it was already almost 11:30. We were thrilled by the soccer game. "Hey," I said to Tim, "do you want to go to a party?" He agreed. I started thinking about Mia. If she went on a date, maybe we would meet and end up at my place. My excitement grew. When we got to the apartment, the party was still going on. Tim and I went over to the keg and talked to various people we knew while drinking beer. I also scanned the crowd for Mia. I didn't see her. Tim was with a girl he knew, and I was just hanging out by the keg. I had my back to two guys who, from what I could gather from their conversation, were college students. I could hear them looking at girls and making comments. It was fun to eavesdrop on these two. "Look," one of them said. That comment caught my attention, and I turned around and saw that they were looking at the stairs. I saw a girl and a guy coming down the stairs, and she was hugging him. She looked a little disheveled. Her hair was messy, and her makeup was a bit smudged. But there was no doubt who she was or what she was doing. The guys behind me had described her perfectly. It was Mia. I froze for a moment. My first impulse was to rush over to her, but then I hesitated. I didn't want any dramatic encounters at this party. I'd been in situations like this before. It was unpleasant and awkward. I decided to leave. I sent Tim a quick message. "At parties like this, it's every man for himself," he replied with a thumbs up. On the way home, I thought about it for a long time. Mia and I hadn't made our relationship official. We hadn't promised each other anything. I guess I couldn't blame her. But I also didn't want to be with a woman who had fun with me one weekend and someone else the next. I decided I shouldn't be angry with her, but I also thought about what I wanted for myself. I wanted something more than weekly dates. It was obvious that we had different goals. By the time I got home, I had made up my mind. No drama, just an immediate end to our relationship. I had to admit that I had fallen in love with her. I was sad, and I knew I would miss her. But as I had already decided, what I wanted and what she clearly wanted were two different things. The next day, Sunday, I went about my usual business. I washed my car, did some laundry, went for a run. What I didn't do was contact Mia. In the middle of the day, I got a text message. "How was the game?" I didn't reply. In the evening, another message arrived. "What are you doing? Want to have dinner?" Again, I didn't reply. I went to bed, still sad but determined. On Monday, she called me on my cell phone at work. I didn't answer and turned on my voicemail. On Monday evening, after work and a run before dinner, I was at home watching a late-night soccer game. I heard a knock at the door. I guessed who it might be and for a moment thought about not answering. But then I thought that this meeting would happen anyway. Maybe it would be better to get it over with. I told myself, "Don't get angry. Stay calm." I opened the door. "Hi," she said when I opened the door. "Where have you been?" she asked with a big happy smile on her face. She came over to hug me. My reaction was not what she expected. I patted her on the back woodenly, without any enthusiasm. She stopped and looked at me with a puzzled expression. I had always been affectionate with her. She sensed that something had changed. "How are you?" she asked, studying my face, still puzzled by the change in my behavior. I replied that everything was fine, but didn't go into details. "Why didn't you call?" she asked. "Didn't you get my messages?" I replied that I hadn't had a chance. It was obvious that she didn't believe me. "Are you mad at me?" she asked. I took a deep breath and sat down on a kitchen chair. "Listen, Mia," I began. "I think we want different things out of this relationship. It's been fun and interesting getting to know you better, but I think we're too different." She looked at me intently, the smile disappearing from her face. Her eyebrows furrowed as she tried to understand what was going on. "Are you leaving me?" she asked. "After everything we've been through together? The trip to the countryside and fishing? It was only a week ago. We had such a good time. What happened?" I thought everything was going well. I could tell she was starting to get worried. She just stared at me, not understanding. Finally, I started. I told her that I didn't like casual relationships. I wanted us to have the potential for a long-term relationship. I told her that I knew we hadn't made any promises to each other, but I wasn't interested in playing the field. "I agree, Patrick," she replied. "I want all of that too." I leaned back in my chair and looked at her with a slight smile. I shook my head. "What?" she asked. I paused, then started telling her about Saturday night. "On Saturday night, Tim and I went to the soccer game," she nodded. "We had a good time. The team won. and everyone was in a good mood. I continued. We decided to go to a party. You were there? She interrupted me with a puzzled look on her face. I told her how we got there and that I had hoped to see her. Then I told her that I was standing by the barrel and heard two guys talking about a girl who was coming down the stairs with some tall guy. I stopped and just looked at her. Now the ball was in her court. She paused for a minute, thinking about what I had said, putting it all together. The party and the lack of a phone call. Patrick, it's nothing. It's just Blake, a guy I went to school with at St. Thomas. I haven't seen him in a long time. He's just a friend, she explained. I sat there and looked at her. I was sure of what I had seen. And then I asked her the key question. Did you sleep with him? I asked calmly. She hissed. What? Why would you think that? He's just an old friend from school that I hang out with sometimes. I stood up. Gently but firmly, I walked her to the door, putting my hand on her back. She continued to protest. Finally, on the porch, I told her I would think about it, turned around, went into the apartment and closed the door. I didn't look back as she slowly walked to her car with tears in her eyes. To be continued. I spent the next year and a half worrying about everything. Work was going well. I took on the case I was assigned and almost doubled its volume. To be honest, it wasn't that difficult. As far as I could tell, Larry was barely working part-time. It wasn't hard to improve on that. Another plus was that my friend Tim Paris was managing my money very well. I was happy to see my investments growing at double-digit rates. I was thinking about buying a house. I could definitely afford a substantial down payment. But to be honest, I was lonely. I wanted a woman in my life. I was afraid that if I bought a house and lived in it alone, it would make me even lonelier. Over the past year, I had dated several women. None of them lasted very long. The longest relationship was with a woman named Hillary. She was very sweet, attractive, a little simple, but smart. She worked at a mid-sized accounting firm. We started dating and eventually got into a relationship. After about 2 months, I realized that something wasn't working in our relationship. It sounds awful, but I got tired of her. I have to admit that there was nothing wrong with Hillary. She was attractive, professional, and smart. But I wasn't interested in her. I had an idea why, but I suppressed the thought for several weeks. Finally, one evening, looking her in the eyes, I broke up with her. She was more surprised than sad. She wanted to know why, but I couldn't give her a satisfactory answer. In the end, she got angry with me. We can still be friends, I said as she got up to leave, leaving her dinner uneaten. She didn't respond to my offer to remain friends, turned around, and walked out of the restaurant. Later, left alone with my thoughts, I discovered the hidden reasons for my dissatisfaction with Hillary. I compared her to Mia. Mia was fun. On the other hand, I was sure that Hillary would never cheat on me. These were the disjointed thoughts that ran through my mind. Had Mia really spoiled me? Was no other woman good enough for me? I hadn't seen Mia since we had a fight at my apartment over a year ago. I heard from mutual friends that she was still studying at Stanhope. News about her always caught my attention, but I suppressed any random thoughts about contacting her. But as happens in life, our paths crossed. Tim and I were downtown at a charity event at the Roosevelt Hotel. There was dinner, an auction, and dancing to live music. I was sitting at a table with several couples from the investment firm where Tim worked. After dinner, the band played, we chatted, and enjoyed the evening. Suddenly, I felt a nudge in my ribs from Tim. "Look over there," he whispered. Unable to ignore him, I turned and saw Mia. She was smiling and walking straight toward me. To be honest, she looked better than I remembered. I turned, smiled at her, and held out my hand to shake hers. She ignored my hand and hugged me tightly. "Hi, stranger," she said. We stood there in awkward silence for a while, just looking at each other. Then Mia quickly broke the ice, asking how I was doing, what was new in my life, and so on. Soon we were sitting at another table, chatting. It felt like we had just picked up where we left off last time. Everything seemed so familiar and natural. No one mentioned what had happened at the party. We danced a few times and spent most of the last hours of the evening together. We deepened our conversation while sitting at the table, and were about to leave when the lights suddenly came on in the hall. It was time to go, but neither of us wanted the evening to end. Finally, we got up. Mia hugged me again, kissed me on the cheek, turned, and headed for the exit. Halfway there, she stopped and turned around. "Call me," she said, and I nodded. Over the next few days, I mentally tugged at the rope. On the one hand, I had such a good time with Mia at the auction. It was the best evening I'd had in months. On the other hand, I didn't trust her. Did I want to open myself up to a relationship I didn't believe in? That was my struggle. Finally, 2 days later, I gave in and called her. I promised myself I would have fun, enjoy Mia's company, but be careful. We started seeing each other again. Everything felt familiar and comfortable. Mia seemed different too. She was less intense, more balanced, more mature. I realized this after our third date. She was just as fun as I remembered her. I had been unfairly comparing her to Hillary. There was no comparison. About a month after we started dating again, we went out to dinner. Suddenly, Mia became serious. "Patrick," she began, "I think we need to talk." Not understanding where she was going with this, I just nodded. "I need to explain Blake to you." Blake? For a moment, I didn't know what she was talking about. Then it suddenly came back to me. Blake from the party. That Blake. This is going to be interesting, I thought. She told me her story. She had gone to a Catholic school in the city. Many children went there to get what was considered the best education. Mia went there because her grandmother was a devout Catholic. Mia had been raised Catholic. In high school, she was a little overweight. There was a group of kids who were in. They were the most popular kids at St. Thomas. They were Blake Langley, Taylor White, and Lisa Shea, Mia's roommate. Mia always felt a little out of place, but there was no doubt about it. Blake was king. His family was wealthy and owned car dealerships in town. Blake always drove a new car. He was a tall, handsome guy, confident and funny. Mia stuck to her Catholic upbringing. She firmly believed that sex should only happen within marriage. According to Mia, when she enrolled at Stanhope as a freshman, she felt like the weight of her upbringing had been lifted off her shoulders. "I have to admit," she told me, "I went a little wild in college." I realized that, and when I heard those words, I couldn't hold back a pang of jealousy. I said nothing. "When I started college, something else happened," she said. "I started playing sports. I signed up for an elective fitness class and got really into it. It became an obsession. I went from 165 pounds to 134. Most people in college gain weight. I lost weight. Then," she said, "she started getting even more attention from guys. Then she started talking about the party. She was happy that she had a good time and was surprised when she met Blake. She had only seen him a few times during her entire time at school. Suddenly, he started paying a lot of attention to her. She remembered that she had always hoped for Blake's attention in school, and now it was happening. It was like I was suddenly in a different time in my life. In school, where popularity was so important, and here I was with the most popular guy in the world, and I didn't have the insecurities I had in school. One thing led to another, and she fell silent. And then I realized that I had lost you because of a fleeting romance with a guy I had barely spoken to in years. She paused. It broke my heart. "I can't tell you how many times I wanted to call you, but that day you were so cold to me. I was afraid." "And you know what's interesting?" she added. "A few weeks later, I found out that Blake was engaged to a girl he met in college out east. I felt cheap." "That's the whole story," she said. "I learned my lesson and I've changed since then." I just nodded, taking in the information. It was a plausible explanation. But with Mia, I was still going to proceed slowly and cautiously. We continued to see each other, usually on weekends and once or twice a week. I definitely saw a more mature Mia, which I liked, and at the same time a wilder Mia behind closed doors. We had been together for almost 3 months since our reunion, and things were going well. I was pushing thoughts of Mia and Blake having fun at the party further and further out of my mind. I was still taking things slow, but there was no doubt in my mind that we were a strong couple. We talked about exclusivity and both agreed. The word love was sometimes whispered. And then everything changed. It was Tuesday evening. Nothing special. We weren't planning on going anywhere. To my surprise, I heard a knock on the door. It was Mia. She had a strange look on her face, not desperate, but something like that. I had never seen that expression on her face before, so it meant something serious. "What's wrong?" I asked. And then she told me. I remember that evening. "We drank too much wine. You can guess the rest." "I'm not going to try to stop you," she said, "but I'm pregnant." We sat there. Suddenly, I had to make an important decision. I thought about what I wanted, what she wanted, and what might happen. We talked for a long time that evening, but we didn't come to a clear decision. I noticed a new side to Mia. I saw a new maturity in her. She was a little different, not as cheerful as when I first met her. To be honest, I liked the new Mia better. Later, when I was alone, analyzing these new events in my life, I realized something. The only thing holding me back was thoughts of Mia's past. She definitely had a wild life in college. She told me about it herself. And of course, there was that night with Blake Langley. She explained it to me. Sort of. But it still bothered me. I thought I could hide it. But memories never fade completely. I thought about it a lot. I'll spare the reader the details of my decision, but I decided that we should stay together for many reasons, including the well-being of the child. My future child. The next few months flew by. We moved in together, then moved into a 3-bedroom townhouse. Mia was planning the wedding. Her mom was helping her. She was supposed to be 6 months pregnant at the wedding, so she had to show up. The time leading up to the wedding and the birth of the baby was crazy, exciting, and nerve-wracking. My whole life had changed dramatically, and in the end, I was happy. One note, the wedding was small. There was no time for a lavish celebration. It was mostly her relatives, my small family, and friends. Friends from both sides. What I didn't realize until it was too late was that Blake Langley was among them. When I found out, I objected. Mia, I'm not inviting that guy to the wedding, I told her. This led to a big argument. In the end, her logic won out. Langley, Taylor White, and Lisa Shea, now Lisa Markham, she married Mitch Markham, had been my friends since high school. They're all my high school friends. I can't invite everyone else and not invite Blake. She paused and continued. Besides, he'll be there with his wife, Bree. I didn't know he was married. I reluctantly agreed. We got married and everything went well. I really got to know Blake Langley. He was great, and I have to admit that I liked him. I didn't trust him, but I liked him. And his wife, Bree, was just beautiful. She was taller than Mia, with long blonde hair and a very slim figure. In the whirlwind of events that followed the wedding, we suddenly became parents. Mia gave birth to a boy, whom we named Michael. Our lives changed. Everything had to be planned. Spontaneity was a thing of the past, but it was good. I enjoyed being a father. And Mia surprised me with what a good mother she became. I talked about how Mia had matured over the years. She was no longer a crazy college student, but a beautiful, mature mother who seemed even more attractive to me than when she was younger. Several things changed for us as new parents. One of those changes was that Mia quit her job at the advertising agency. She became a stay-at-home mom. But she still found time to work out, and soon her post-pregnancy body was as toned and fit as ever. About a year after Michael was born, I came home to a candlelit dinner. Mia told me that Michael was already in bed. I started to guess what the occasion was. I have a surprise for you, she announced with a smile on her face. The surprise was that Mia was pregnant again. We had discussed it and both agreed that we wanted another child. I just didn't think it would happen so soon. I think we'd better start looking for a house, I announced. We discussed it, but we were too busy to do anything about it. The townhouse we were renting had 3 bedrooms, so we had plenty of space. But we still wanted our own house and decided to start looking as soon as the baby was born. A few months later, we got more news. Mia was pregnant with twins. Suddenly, the question of how many children we wanted was settled. Now, our future home had to accommodate 5. Mia gave birth to twin girls. We named them Cleo and Claire. I know, a little cute, but that's what we wanted, and that's what our 2 precious girls became. We found a large, dilapidated 2-story house outside the city and bought it. It was hardly our dream home, but it suited our needs. For the next few years, our life was good. With 3 children, it was busy, but at the same time quite fulfilling, full of happiness and domestic comfort. My work was going well. I started brokering sales of non-traditional building materials, and even when traditional markets were in decline, I had alternative products to sell. Financially, we were doing fine. We found a woman who came 3 times a week for a few hours, which allowed Mia to run errands, shop for groceries, and go to the gym. The children loved Estrelita, and she became part of our family. Guess what? Mia asked one evening when I came home from work. I'm graduating from high school this summer, she said, waving a printed invitation. She said she really wanted to go. We could stay with her mom and grandmother in the city. We would take the kids with us and have a mini vacation. Her mom and grandmother could spend time with the kids while we went to various events. I agreed, but deep down I wasn't as excited about the reunion. I knew some of her friends, and they were all pretty nice, but I assumed Blake Langley would be there. It bothered me not only that he had entertained my wife, then my girlfriend many years ago, but also that, as far as I knew, this guy had an inflated ego. As it turned out, the meeting was planned. An informal get-together at a neighborhood bar on Friday night. A formal meeting at the Davenport Hotel in the city center on Saturday, and a family picnic at Laurelwood Park on Sunday. Soon we were driving 2 hours to Mia's mother's house in town, where we were staying for the weekend. The next day, we gathered at the Marshfield pub. Immediately after we arrived, Mia rushed over to a group of girls that included Lisa and several others I recognized. They were her good friends from school. I moved to the edge of the crowd. I saw Langley, Taylor White, Mitch Markham, and a few other guys. Even at a high school reunion, the school cliques had reformed. I sipped my beer and watched silently. From across the room, I could hear Langley talking. He was one of those guys who talked loudly by nature. I was far away from him, but I could hear almost everything he said. I noticed that he and his friends were looking at the girls and lowering their voices. I thought I even heard Mia's name. I watched them look at Mia and the other girls. Langley whispered something to his friends, and they all burst out laughing. I guessed what he had said. I looked over at the guys and suddenly recognized someone. It was Teresa Paris, my friend Tim's sister. I walked over to her. "Teresa, hi." I started to introduce myself. "Patrick Price. I'm your brother Tim's friend," I said. She looked at me, then smiled. "Of course, Patrick. I remember you," she said. I was glad to see a familiar face at this event. "Patrick," Teresa began, "this is my husband, Ryan O'Malley." We shook hands and smiled. Ryan was thin, wore glasses, dressed conservatively, and was pleasant-looking. He was nothing like the guys from the Langley fraternity and the others. I learned that Ryan had attended St. Thomas University and that he and Teresa now lived in the city, in the Garlington neighborhood. I told him I was married to Mia Durant. Ryan said he had known her since high school, but I got the impression he hadn't hung out with the same crowd. Like a lifeline, I latched onto Teresa and Ryan, eagerly comparing our college years and our lives since. I learned that Ryan was a civil engineer and Teresa taught health at a school. Eventually, they left, and I turned to see where Mia was and how much longer we would have to stand there. I saw that her friends had joined Langley and the guys. I felt a pang of jealousy when I noticed Mia standing next to Langley. I walked over, stood between Langley and Mia, and asked her how she was doing. She was surprised, but then kissed me on the cheek. She introduced me to some of her friends again, and they all seemed nice. Langley was very friendly, asking about my children, my job, and other superficial things. I have to admit he was charming. But there was something about him I didn't like. Later, as we drove home, Mia talked about how much she missed her school friends. I told her about meeting Teresa and her husband. I asked Mia where Bree was, Langley's beautiful wife. "They're not together anymore," was all she said. The next evening was the most formal of all the alumni gatherings. Mia wore a low-cut dress that showed off her cleavage. She looked very good. On the way to the hotel, I announced that I would be the driver. At the event, I sipped light beer while Mia and all her friends drank cocktails. I spotted Langley, White, Markham, and the same group of guys from the night before, drinking and laughing together. I walked over to them. We started talking, and I learned a little more about them. Langley's family owned a local Toyota dealership, and he was the CEO. It turned out that Mitch Markham was a sales manager and worked for Langley. Taylor White was a lawyer, and Langley Motors was one of his clients. Langley and White lived in Garlington Heights, not far from Teresa and Ryan O'Malley's house. In the end, I left after an unexpectedly pleasant conversation with these guys. They all seemed like people I would have befriended under different circumstances. However, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why, I didn't trust Blake Langley. Most likely because I knew he had been entertaining my wife during those years. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get it out of my head. Later, there was a dance. Mia and I danced to a few songs, and I realized she was about to get drunk. She danced with several guys, including Langley. Without letting them know I was watching, I kept my eyes on them. I didn't notice anything suspicious. Later, as I was driving home, I thought that maybe my wariness toward Mia's friends from school was unwarranted. Overall, they seemed like decent people, and any negative feelings toward them were uncalled for. Sure, Langley was selfish and a little boastful, but was that really so bad? The next day, we had a picnic in the park. The weather was beautiful. I'd say about half the people there were with small children like us. Michael had just turned 3, and the twins, Claire and Cleo, were 14 months old and trying to master the art of walking. There was plenty to keep us entertained. A few boys were playing soccer, and someone was trying to organize a volleyball game. I had 3 small children, so all my attention was focused on them. Mia and I were trying to feed the kids peanut butter and jelly sandwiches when Langley and Lisa came over. "Pat, we need someone to play volleyball. Do you want to?" Langley asked. I loved volleyball. Before Michael was born, I played in the City League in Stanhope. "Thanks," I replied. "I've got enough to do." And I turned back to the kids. Lisa intervened and said she would help Mia with the kids while I went play. I hesitated, then joined the game. I saw that they had picked Ryan O'Malley and a few other guys. About half the players knew how to play, and the other half knew about as much as you know in gym class. It was fun at first, but pretty quickly the guys on the other side, including Langley and Markham, became rivals. Both of these guys were over 6 feet tall and athletically built. They started throwing the balls. Obviously, my team was losing, if they were even keeping score. At one point, I saw someone setting Langley up for another shot. As I said, I had played volleyball. As soon as he was ready to serve, I jumped out to my side of the net with my arms outstretched. I blocked the shot, and the ball bounced off Langley's head. My team cheered, and for a moment I saw anger flash across Langley's face. But it disappeared as quickly as it had appeared, and a smile broke out on his face. "Nice block, Pat," he said to me. After that, the level of play on the other side went up. Stronger hits and light slaps started to appear. It was no longer a friendly, carefree game. It became serious. At one point, Langley threw the ball straight at Ryan O'Malley's face. It looked intentional. Ryan's glasses flew off, and I saw him bring his hand up to his face. He seemed to be in pain. I picked up his glasses and told the group that I was done. They all tried to convince me to continue, but I ignored them, and Ryan and I returned to Teresa. Ryan didn't make any negative comments or complain about being hit in the face, but he must have been in pain. At first, when the children were buckled into the car, Mia was in a good mood and happily talked about her friends as we drove out of town to Stanhope. About halfway there, she stopped talking. "Hey, what's wrong?" I asked. Are you okay?" At first, she didn't answer, staring silently out the window. By this point, I knew what to do. Stay quiet and wait for her to respond. Finally, she answered. "I miss my friends," she said. "I also miss my mom and grandma," she added. She went on to talk about how much her mother and grandmother loved spending time with their children and how that had helped her. "I always imagined my children growing up surrounded by my family and friends," she said. "Everything is fine in Stanhope, but I miss the city." I thought about it for a few minutes. I didn't really need to be close to the office. I could easily drive to our periodic sales meetings. Even Tim Paris had left Stanhope and was living in the suburbs. There was almost nothing keeping us in Stanhope. I started thinking about moving. Next part. Our house in Stanhope sold quickly, and we made a significant profit. We ended up buying a house in a nice neighborhood in Garlington, not far from Teresa and Ryan O'Malley. We had become friends with them, but they were more my friends than Mia's. We were also close to her mother and grandmother. That was convenient too. Mia saw her friends often, but motherhood took up most of our time. I took great pleasure in seeing what a wonderful mother Mia had become. Looking back on those early days when she loved to have fun and party, I can't help but conclude that she had definitely grown up. The craziness still showed up from time to time, but not very often. We enjoyed living in the city. It didn't matter where I lived for my business. The house we bought was a good size, with 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. The house had an unfinished basement, and I set up an office there. Over the next year, we settled into the house and got used to city life. I loved spending time with the kids, and Mia, as I mentioned, was a wonderful mother. Socially, we spent time with her former colleagues from St. Thomas. We also hung out with Ryan and Teresa O'Malley, and sometimes with my old college friend Tim Paris, Teresa's brother. Overall, at that point, our relationship was great, the kids were doing well in school, and financially, we were more than comfortable. We loved our home and our neighborhood, and we lived very close to Mia's mother's house. So what could have gone wrong? That Friday, I had a sales meeting in Stanhope. I wandered around the office for a while and returned home around lunchtime. When I got home, the usual cheerful chaos ensued. I sat the kids in their high chairs, put bibs on them, and braced myself for the onslaught of spilled drinks, dropped plates, and food scattered across the kitchen table. I have something interesting to tell you, Mia smiled and said to me. What? I asked. Later, she replied. Finally, when all the kids were fed, washed, dressed in their pajamas, tucked into bed and read to, I went downstairs and saw Mia staring at her iPad in the dining room. Well, what's going on? I asked. Oh, Patrick, she began. I have an amazing opportunity. I talked to my mom and I think it's going to work out. I remained silent, letting the conversation flow. Eventually, I realized that all the important points would come out on their own. I was at the park with the kids and ran into Lisa and her daughters, she began. We stopped by her house and Mitch was there, having lunch. He was in a bad mood. She went on to explain that Mitch's job as a head of sales and marketing at Langley Motors was stressful and exhausting. He had told her he needed a part-time marketing assistant, someone who could work 20 hours a week. She paused and looked at me with a smile. At first, I was a little confused. What did Mitch Markham's marketing assistant have to do with... And then it dawned on me. You? I asked, and she nodded, still smiling. Oh, how the hell are you going to work 20 hours a week? I exclaimed. She then explained her complicated plan to me, which involved her mother coming in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and Mitch said the schedule was flexible and she could work from home if necessary. I didn't like this plan for several reasons. We didn't need the money, and besides, it would be extra stress for me. I protested quietly. I tried to find flaws in her plan, but she had thought of everything and had answers. I protested that we didn't need the money. Patrick, it's not about the money. I have a college degree and I want to use it. I love kids, but sometimes I want to talk to other adults. I really want this, she added. Of course, I still have to go through an interview, she told me, but Mitch already asked when I can start. I had my doubts. I was most concerned about the children. They were still young, and as I said, Mia was a wonderful mother. The second most important reason for my concern was, selfishly, myself. It wasn't easy for me to juggle work and household chores. And now that she was working, and my mother-in-law was with the kids almost all the time, I imagined that I would be distracted more and more often. In the end, I gave in and said, let's give it a try. As expected, Mia got the job. The first few weeks were difficult because of the need to drive the kids around and be away from them. Mia had been with them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for their entire lives. Eventually, we found our rhythm. Her mother took good care of the kids on the days Mia worked, and all my concerns about productivity disappeared. Mia's mood also improved as she better understood her role in the business. She became happier and more confident. Taking a break from childcare for a few days a week really had a positive impact. At first, it was once every few weeks. I hardly noticed it. But then I realized that her part-time was turning into full-time. At some point, we started discussing it, and it turned into an argument. Later, she apologized and said she would talk to Mitch about her work schedule. A few weeks later, we were invited to a party at Blake Langley's house in Garlington Heights. Blake was there with an attractive young woman I hadn't seen before. Mitch, Taylor, and a few other people were there with their wives. Blake, as befits a host, simply charmed me. As I said, he's really fun to be around, and I had a great evening. Mia is doing a great job in the marketing department. The business is growing, and I have to say that Mia is contributing a lot to that, he told me. There were about 20 people at the party. The weather was nice, and we all gathered in the backyard around the pool. I had 2 light beers throughout the evening, knowing that I had to drive home afterwards. I was talking to a group of guys about the upcoming soccer season in Stanhope and lost track of time. It was getting dark, and in the middle of the conversation, I looked up to see where Mia was. I scanned the backyard. I saw Lisa, and Mia was usually right next to her. Mia wasn't there. Then I wondered where Langley was. I looked around. He wasn't there either. Maybe I'd had too much to drink. To calm myself down, I decided to look around. Calmly, but decisively, I walked away from the conversation about sports. I walked over to the sliding doors leading into the house. There was no one in the kitchen. I walked down the hall to the bathroom. It looked occupied. I rounded the corner of the living room and saw the stairs leading to the second floor. By this time, I was starting to get nervous. Memories of that party many years ago flashed through my mind when Langley and Mia came down from the upper floor. I was about to go down the stairs when I heard a voice from the hallway. It was Langley. "Pat," he began. "Are you looking for the bathroom?" he asked. I noticed movement in the dark hallway behind him. I immediately headed there. What were the two of them doing in the dark corner of the house? Suddenly, I realized that his young girlfriend Olivia was with him. Suddenly, I felt very stupid. "Yes," I squeezed out. "I was looking for the bathroom," I lied. Langley looked at me strangely. I almost embarrassed myself. He had undoubtedly noticed my strange behavior. He escorted me upstairs to the bathroom, remaining charming as ever. After I sheepishly left the bathroom, I returned to the party and saw Mia with Lisa, Mitch, and a small group of people. Everyone seemed fine. I cursed myself. Since we got married, she had never given me a reason to doubt her. Memories of her and Langley kept popping into my head. Just forget about it, I told myself. Later, as we drove home, Mia was quiet. She was usually cheerful and happy after seeing her friends. Today, she was different. Besides, when I suggested we make love, she flatly refused. Usually, after a couple of drinks, Mia would agree. I expected that, but today it didn't happen. 2 days later, I got a message from Ryan O'Malley asking me to come over that evening. I had become friends with Ryan and Teresa, with Mia, less so. We hung out with them from time to time, but more often it was just Ryan and me, or even Ryan, Teresa, and me. On Thursday evening, I stopped by their house, and after all the holiday handshakes and hugs, we went out to the backyard. Teresa asked if I wanted a beer or anything else, and I said, "No, thanks." "You might want to have a drink, Pat," Ryan said seriously. Teresa returned with 3 bottles of beer. "What's going on?" I asked. They fell silent, and an awkward silence ensued. I saw tears in Teresa's eyes. "We got some bad news last week," Ryan began. "Cancer, pancreatic cancer. It looks very scary." Ryan told me the whole story. He had been in pain, thinking it would go away, but it didn't. Finally, he went to see a doctor. They ran some tests and started working with an oncologist. The prognosis, according to them, is maybe a year. His voice trembled with emotion as he said it. "The thing is," he told me, "we don't want many people to know about this. We're only telling family and a few close friends. I know you have to tell Mia, but I don't want it to go beyond the family." I sat there stunned, trying to process this terrible news. "What?" I began. "What can I do?" I asked. "Just be a good friend. Come by when you can," Ryan said. "And when you can, be a friend to Teresa." He looked at her, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Pat, you're one of the few real friends I trust. Teresa and I just wanted you to know." He told me. Later, on my way home, I found myself in tears, thinking about what they had told me. I knew I had to stay strong for Ryan and Teresa. Life went on, and I spent time with Ryan and Teresa whenever I could. Mia came with me a few times, but she seemed to find excuses to avoid those visits. She told me it was hard for her to think about death. When I told her that it was hard for everyone, she didn't say anything. Looking back on that period of our lives, I realized that our relationship began to change. At first, it was very subtle, but looking back, I can see that we began to drift apart. I spent a lot of time with Ryan, sometimes with Teresa too. Most of my emotional energy was focused on my good friends. At the time, I didn't realize it, but less and less energy was going into my marriage. At the same time, Mia started working more at Langley Motors. Of course, we continued to live as a family, and with 3 young children, including twins, we always had plenty to do, so in many ways, the changes in our relationship went unnoticed. But first things first. As I explained, I was feeling jealous. I know it doesn't sound serious, but I kept thinking about a scene that happened many years ago at a party when Mia came down the stairs with Langley, looking fresh and happy. You might ask, why did you marry her if you didn't trust her completely? My answer is this. If she hadn't been pregnant, we probably wouldn't have gotten married, and I have to admit a few things. First, she's a great mom and has been a good wife for most of our marriage, and she never gave me any reason to suspect her. Finally, there has always been a strong emotional connection between us, but things started to change. Again, because of work, the kids, and supporting Ryan and Teresa, I was very busy. Mia was working much more than originally planned, 20 hours a week. With the help of her mother and grandmother, she was mostly able to keep up with the housework. But the emotional connection was strained. The first piece of the puzzle fell into place a few weeks later. I stopped by to visit Ryan. We played chess. He was much better than me, but it was a pleasant way to pass the time. Teresa came home about an hour after I arrived. We chatted about the usual things. I saw Mia downtown last night, she told me. Downtown? She had come home after dinner, but I thought she had said she was working late. My curiosity was piqued. Where did you see her? I asked quietly. Teresa said she was near Cansey Street, in the area with restaurants, bars, and boutiques. Really? I replied, trying to remain calm. Who was she with? Teresa looked at me sharply. Ryan, who had just lifted a pawn, froze in mid-move and also stared at me intently. Teresa stammered, I can't say. I was driving down Clancy and saw her. She's so beautiful, it's hard not to notice her. Everything okay, Pat? Ryan asked. I tried to assure them that everything was fine, but I think they understood my behavior. After a while, I left the house and walked a short distance to my house. On the way, I tried to figure out how to ask about her on Clancy Street while feeding the children. She didn't say anything about going out. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I asked her what she had been doing at work. She said they were having a big sale coming up, so she was staying late. I asked if she had to meet with anyone from the local radio or TV stations. She said no, everything was being done online. I rarely leave my office, she told me. Who approves the advertising campaign? I asked. First Mitch, then Ryan, she replied. But then she looked at me and asked, why are you suddenly asking so many questions? I replied that I was just curious. She looked at me intently, not believing my sudden curiosity. Suddenly, she stopped talking and went to bed. I sat down in the kitchen and thought about it. It wasn't hard to come to this conclusion. I knew for sure that my wife had just lied to me. I just didn't understand why. Over the next week, she came home early, took care of the children, and seemed to be trying to communicate better with me. If it weren't for my suspicions, it would have been a happy time for the family. The following week, she worked late on Monday and came home after the children had gone to bed. 2 days later, I received a text message from her. I have to work late, but my mom doesn't mind helping with dinner for the kids. When the kids finished eating, I told my mother-in-law that I had to go out. She was happy to stay with the kids. As I drove past the car dealership, I looked for her black Highlander. I knew the employees parked on the north side of the building. The parking lot was visible from the road. As I drove by, I noticed that there were no cars in the parking lot. I knew Langley drove a Lexus SUV, but there was no Lexus, let alone a black Highlander. I looked at my watch, 7:36 p.m. I turned around and drove home, hoping and praying that Mia was there and we just hadn't crossed paths. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. She arrived at 9:15. Her late nights were getting later and later. The kids were already in bed. She hadn't made it in time. Where were you? I asked. Where do you think? She replied, irritation in her voice. Were you at work? I began. At the office? Of course, where else? Her attitude was becoming increasingly negative. I sat down on the sofa and digested the second lie. I barely noticed when she left. I sat there for almost an hour, thinking about what to do. All the signs pointed to her doing something she didn't want me to know about. Most likely with Langley. The next day, Mia came home at the usual time. She was happy and in a good mood. This didn't happen often, and despite my suspicions, the evening turned out to be pleasant, like in the old days. A fun dinner with the kids, then baths, pajamas, teeth brushing, and reading. Their bedtime ritual. It was always nicer when we both participated. Later, when I came down from the bedroom, I found Mia in the living room with a glass of white wine. She was still in a good mood. We've been invited to the Blake family cottage on Lake Baltus this Saturday. The kids are going too, she told me. I didn't respond, digesting the information. Mitch, Lisa, Taylor, and a few others will be there, she added. The weather is supposed to be nice. It'll be fun. I thought about it for a moment before answering. I didn't really want to go with that group, but I really wanted to find out what was going on between Mia and Langley. Or maybe I didn't. I agreed to go and said I thought it would be fun. The next evening, Thursday, I stopped by Ryan and Teresa's place. As I mentioned, they lived around the corner, a block and a half away from us. It was unpleasant to see, But there was no doubt that Ryan had lost a lot of weight. He looked haggard, and his skin had taken on an unnatural color. He had been studying the latest medical reports they had received. Unfortunately, there was no good news. Nevertheless, both Ryan and Teresa remained in good spirits, and I admired them for that. "What's wrong?" Ryan asked me. "Are you okay?" He looked at me with a concerned expression. I felt terrible. My friend was terminally ill, and my personal problems were bringing me down. "Nothing," I said, trying to sound positive. "Hey, buddy, we're your friends. What's going on?" I sat there for a minute, then told them about my suspicions about Mia and Langley. I was thinking the same thing when I saw her downtown a few weeks ago. I didn't see Blake there, but I had a feeling she was on some kind of date, Teresa said. I told them she had lied to me about that night. I told them about the strange watch. And finally, I admitted that I had no proof. But I felt like our marriage was falling apart. When I left, they promised me their friendship and any help I might need. "Keep an eye out at the lake this weekend," Ryan advised. Saturday turned out to be a beautiful day, and we left before 9 in the morning. It was about an hour's drive to the lake. Several people stayed there overnight, but with 3 children, that was fortunately not an option for us. The house was an old log cabin that had been modernized and added onto. There was a dock, a boat, and water skis. There was a small sandy beach on one side of the lake where the kids could play. Mia and a few other moms spread out on the small beach. The kids splashed around in the shallow water. The women chatted, and I stepped away. I wandered around the property, talked to a few people, and grabbed a beer. I noticed that Langley, Mitch, Taylor, and a few other people had gathered together. From time to time, I heard Langley whispering loudly. I saw the beautiful Olivia, Langley's girlfriend, talking to everyone. I felt a little better. After a while, Mia asked me to watch the kids, and I agreed. I watched her, pregnant Lisa, and their friends socializing near the house. I kept an eye on the children to make sure they didn't go too far into the water. From time to time, a jet ski would speed past us. The children were fascinated by the shiny watercraft and the loud noise they made. About half an hour had passed when I looked up and saw that Mia and her friends had gathered together. I saw Lisa and a few other people, but Mia was not there. Keeping my eyes on the children in the water, I looked around periodically trying to find her. But I couldn't find her. I was about to pull the kids ashore to get a closer look when I suddenly heard Langley. I peeked out from behind one of the large evergreen trees and saw him hugging his girlfriend Olivia on the other side of the lake, near the dock, surrounded by a group of people. Maybe there's really no cause for concern, I thought. After a while, Mia appeared. "I can take over now," she sighed, turning to me. She looked almost normal, but something was wrong, and I looked at her closely, trying to figure out what it was. "What?" she began. "Why are you looking at me?" "I'm watching the kids. Go have fun." I wanted to relax a little, so I decided to take a walk along the west side of the lake. When we first arrived, I had noticed several trails in that direction. I walked through the woods and came to a fork in the trail. I turned inland and continued down the narrow path, thinking about my life. I was taking stock. I had a good job with a good salary, and everything was fine. I loved my children, and despite my recent doubts, I loved Mia. Mia was a wonderful mother, and we lived in a nice neighborhood. The inconsistencies, which could probably be called inconsistencies, in her whereabouts on those few occasions probably had very good reasons. Encouraged by optimistic thoughts, I decided to return to the party. I was walking along the inner path when I suddenly heard voices. They seemed to be at the other end of the path, closer to the lake. I stopped opposite those who were talking, hiding behind thick, deciduous trees. I heard Langley's loud voice and realized that he was probably with his friends. "That's why we close early on Wednesdays," I heard Langley laugh, "so we can feast on this eagle." Deafening noises drowned out some of the comments. "To see him on the table." Again, indistinct comments and laughter. "I look forward to every Wednesday. I can't wait for closing time." At that moment, a pair of jet skis raced across the lake, and for a few moments I couldn't hear what they were saying. Then there was a brief, indistinct conversation, and I heard someone say, "As a lawyer for the firm, I must remind you of the no fraternization policy," Taylor said seriously, addressing, as I understood, Langley. At that moment, another jet ski flew by, drowning out part of the conversation. But through the noise, I heard a phrase that I thought I recognized from the muffled conversation. "Besides, Pat's a good guy, so..." There was more noise from the other side of the lake, but I caught the last phrase. His wife. At that moment, all three jet skis raced past. I couldn't hear anything else over the noise. It sounded like the guys were coming back, their voices growing quieter and quieter as I sat there pressed against the bushes. I sat there and thought. Although I hadn't heard everything they said, it was pretty obvious what was going on. Langley entertained Mia at least every Wednesday night, apparently after closing early at the car dealership where he worked. And then he bragged about it to his friends. Taylor, the company lawyer, warned Langley about the possible consequences. And apparently, he had some sympathy for me. The fun I had been having just a few minutes ago deflated like a popped balloon. My suspicions were confirmed. Now I had to decide what to do. First, and this wasn't easy, but I knew I was doing the right thing, I had to continue acting normal without showing any anger or suspicion. Then I needed to contact a lawyer. Methodically, I began to go over all my steps in my head and divide our lives. The rest of the day I focused on two things: spending time with the children and avoiding Mia and Langley. All the way home, I tried to remain calm and neutral. From time to time, I noticed that my thoughts were drifting away from what I was hearing and starting to race. "Patrick, calm down," Mia said. Fortunately, everyone was exhausted from the day at the lake and went to bed early. I spent the rest of the weekend doing the usual household chores that all homeowners have. I avoided Mia as much as possible. I was afraid my mask would slip and I wasn't ready to confront her. Still, since I worked from home in my basement office, I needed to think about my next steps outside the house. I knew I needed a lawyer, but I didn't know one. I called Tim Paris, my friend and financial advisor, and Ryan. I asked for their opinion, explained the situation, and promised to keep everything confidential. "Can I tell Teresa about this?" Ryan asked. I said yes, but no one else. By the end of the week, I had found someone with a good reputation. On Friday at 3 in the afternoon, I was in Myron Overby's office. I studied this man. He seemed well-mannered and gentle. Several times I asked him to speak louder. As the conversation progressed, I became increasingly nervous. I was afraid I was about to fall into the clutches of a ruthless shark. This man looked like a librarian with rosy cheeks, soft and not very imposing in his suit and neat bow tie. "Do you have any questions for me?" Myron asked. I hesitated. I wasn't sure about this man. I knew that I would most likely have to fight Mia. But I wasn't sure that Myron was the person I wanted by my side in the trenches. Noticing my confusion, Myron spoke. "Mr. Price," he began, "I've noticed some hesitation on your part, I understand. I know my manners are polite and well thought out." He added, "But please don't mistake my appearance for weakness. My clients always leave with a favorable impression. Always, I assure you." The last few sentences were delivered with icy calm. I had seen others underestimate Myron and miscalculate their strategies, and I was immediately convinced of how competent and effective he could be. "Mia Overby," I said, standing up and extending my hand across the table. "I have no doubts." I said this as we shook hands. Myron gave me a list of necessary information. We talked a little more. Finally, he asked me a specific question. "Did you ask your wife about your reasonable suspicions?" "Not really," I replied. "When I asked her late at night or outside of work, she got angry. And until I heard those boys talking by the lake, I didn't think she could betray me like that. After all, she was a good wife and a wonderful mother." I sighed, feeling like I was about to cry. I was stunned by the reality of the situation. My life was on the verge of change. "Can you forgive her?" Myron asked. I sat there for a moment and thought about it. "I really thought I could forgive her," I told Myron. "But I'll never trust her again," I added. Myron looked at me, nodded, and squeezed my fingers. Then he told me how he thought things would unfold. He paused, looked at me, and asked one last question. "Is there any physical evidence we can get? Anything? A text message or a photo?" Myron asked. "Any evidence will be a trump card for us." I leaned back in my chair and thought. After a few minutes, I told him I had an idea. As we parted, we agreed to meet the following week. In the meantime, I began to develop a plan to gather evidence. By then, I had a plan ready. I knew that the car dealership closed early on Wednesdays. I parked my car at a grocery store 2 blocks away from the dealership and walked to Langley Motors. Around 4 o'clock, I went in to surprise Mia. I told her I was nearby. Quickly glancing inside while no one was looking, I slipped into the restroom. I hid in a closed stall. No one came in to check. I waited. A little after 6, I stepped out into the dark showroom. I stood still for a few minutes listening. At first, everything seemed quiet. Then I heard a woman's laughter coming from deep inside the building. I couldn't tell who it was, but I remembered the conversation I had overheard by the lake. I quietly crept up to Langley's office. The noise behind the door, still muffled, grew louder. From the sighs and moans, it was clear what was happening behind the closed door. With my phone in my hand and my camera ready, I quietly turned the handle of the unlocked office door. When I took the fourth picture, I realized I had made a huge mistake. She looked up and screamed. A moment later, Langley saw me too. "What the hell?" he shouted. As I found out, his partner wasn't Mia. It was his girlfriend, Olivia. She was yelling at me to get out, and he was yelling at her to let him go. A storm of thoughts raced through my head, and I realized why he decided to close early on Wednesdays. "What are you doing here, Pat?" Langley shouted. I wanted to turn around and run away, but I knew that would create an even bigger problem later. I needed to explain everything and maybe fix my unfortunate mistake. I apologized and said I had made a big mistake. To my surprise, Langley wasn't as angry as he should have been. Olivia locked herself in Langley's private bathroom. I tried to explain everything. "Last week at the party at your lake house, I overheard you talking to the others on the trail," I told him. He nodded, staring intently at me. "It was hard to hear everything, but from what I could make out, you were talking about Mia." I hesitated. "She was on the table." At that moment, Olivia appeared, fully dressed. She sat silently and listened to my explanation. I said I needed proof. And that's how we ended up in the situation we were in now. I apologized to Olivia. She asked for my phone. She scrolled through the photos and showed one to Langley. "I like this one," Olivia said good-naturedly. "Mia is a wonderful person, attractive. I've known her for a long time, but we're not having an affair," he said to me with a strange expression on his face. "And you'd better not start an affair," Olivia added. I felt a slight sense of relief. They didn't seem particularly angry and even seemed to like some of my photos. "Can I ask you a favor?" I asked them. I asked them to forget everything. I begged them not to tell anyone, especially Mia. By this point, I was feeling uncomfortable. "Pat, yes, we can keep quiet," Langley agreed. "But on one condition," he told me. I nodded vigorously. I was willing to do anything to keep them quiet. "We'll leave the photos," Langley smiled. "To be continued." As I walked a few blocks to my car, I felt a mixture of emotions. First, I was embarrassed by my jealous mistake. Second, I was relieved that Langley and Olivia had reacted so sensibly to my blunder. And finally, I felt immense happiness that my wife had not been unfaithful to me. Apparently, I had completely misinterpreted what had been said at the lake. On the way home, I vowed to myself that I would be the best, most patient husband, that I would not worry or ask questions about her irregular schedule. She was doing what made her happy, and apparently she was good at it. I was happy for Mia. I began the process of repairing the relationship I had destroyed. I called my lawyer, Myron Overby, and asked him to step aside. After a brief interrogation, he agreed. Flowers, small gifts, gestures of appreciation. I tried to show Mia how much she meant to me. I reflected on what a good mother she was, and I began to compliment her more often to let her know how much I appreciated her. "What's gotten into you?" she asked once when I sent flowers to her office. I simply replied that I loved her and loved our family. There was a general feeling of elation in our home, which spread to the children. On the days when we all had dinner together, the conversation was cheerful and lively. The only negative aspect that contrasted with the new happiness I was experiencing at home was Ryan's health. His condition had deteriorated, and he often lacked the energy for our regular chess games. He and Teresa were the only people I told about my suspicious mistake when I caught Blake Langley entertaining his girlfriend on the table in his office. Despite my deteriorating health, Ryan laughed heartily at my mistake. It was one of the last happy moments of our life together. Mia still sometimes stayed late at work, missed days for no apparent reason, and gave some illogical answers to certain questions. I began to simply accept and trust her, no matter how strange her explanations were. Life in our house went on as usual, and Mia's mother became an invaluable part of our family. She looked after the children when necessary, as Mia started working full-time at Langley Motors. One evening, Mia came home and said she had to be in Denver in 2 weeks for a dealer conference. It was a 4-day trip. leaving on Sunday and returning on Thursday. Who's going with you? I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. She said she was going alone, but that other marketing people from around the country would be there. Normally, I would have been suspicious and asked more questions, but I just repeated the mantra in my head. I trust her. On Sunday, I drove her to the airport and she flew to Denver on the 10:40 a.m. flight. Around 1:30 p.m., she called to say she had arrived and that the flight had been uneventful. That week seemed particularly difficult for me in terms of communicating with the children. By Tuesday morning, I was on the verge of a breakdown. Mia's mom noticed my state when she arrived in the afternoon. "Why don't you relax and have dinner with a friend or something? Just go out for the evening and unwind," she suggested. "I'll bring the kid's grandmother over. We can manage." I hesitated. She was right. I needed a break. I accepted her offer and arranged to meet Tim Perry, a good friend and financial advisor in the city center in the Fur District. It was a popular area with bars, restaurants, and trendy shops. We had a nice dinner, but then Tim had to go home. At 6 in the morning, he got a call from his office on the East Coast. I looked at my watch. It wasn't even 7 yet. I crossed the street to Ballantino's, a bar we used to go to that I liked. It was crowded, so I sat down at the bar, ordered a glass of wine, and relaxed. 10 minutes later, as I was finishing my wine, I heard someone call my name. "Pat, what are you doing here?" It was Lisa Markham, a good friend of Mia's and Mitch's wife. It was nice to see a familiar face. She was sitting at Ballantino's with 3 other women at a table in the corner. I told her I was having dinner with a friend and just having a drink before bed. She said it was her bachelorette party, and they were waiting for a table at a restaurant. "Where's Me?" she asked, using her nickname. I explained that she was out of town on a business trip for a few days. "Oh yes, I think she said she had to go somewhere," Lisa said. "What's Mitch up to?" I asked. "He's out of town too. I was going to go with him, but he said he had something come up and couldn't make it." "That's too bad," she said. "Except for the airport, I like Denver," she added. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. Did she say Denver? That's where Mia is. I had to stay calm, but I needed more information. "Did Mitch fly alone?" I asked casually. She said yes. "When did he leave?" I asked. "On Sunday, on the morning flight. He arrives early in the day and returns on Thursday." With that, she fell silent. "Why are you asking so many questions?" she asked suddenly. I brushed off her question as best I could and changed the subject. We chatted for a few more minutes, then Lisa's friends told her their table was ready and she left. I was suspicious. What a coincidence that I ran into Lisa, I thought. She never mentioned she was traveling with anyone, especially not with her boss, Mitch Markham. I decided to call her. I had a little hope that it was just some kind of miscommunication. Maybe there was a logical explanation. I called her. We chatted for a bit, and I told her I had dinner with Tim. "Well, what did you do after work?" I asked. "Just went back to my room," she replied. I asked if she had seen anyone she knew. She said no, she was alone. I thought about it for a second, but then quickly dismissed the idea. Was it possible that Markham was in Denver on other business? Maybe, but unlikely. On my way home from the Fear District, I came up with a plan. I would need Mia's mother's help with the children. I thought through all the details and already had a plan of action. To be continued. On the plane to Denver, I took a seat in the middle. I was glad I managed to find at least one seat at the last minute. On the bus to the car rental place, I reviewed my strategy. I hid in the lobby of the Marriott Denver downtown, where I found out she was staying. If she was really alone, my visit would be a big pleasant surprise, and we would stay in Denver for the weekend. However, if something else was going on with Markham, we were in for another confrontation. When I arrived at that Marriott, it was midday. Nothing much was happening. I made myself comfortable in a shady alcove. I had a baseball cap and a newspaper. I felt a little awkward sitting there, but I knew I had to find out what was going on with Mia, if anything was going on at all. I sat and waited. Every time someone entered, I looked up. Around 5 o'clock, the lobby became busy. 20 minutes later, I saw Mia enter. She was alone and walked across the lobby toward the elevator. She was alone in the elevator. Above the door was a sign indicating the floors. I noticed that the elevator stopped on the 8th floor. I looked at my watch. It was almost 5:30. I decided that if she got out, she wouldn't be able to leave before 6:30. After all, she was my wife and I knew her habits. I waited. 6:30 turned into 7, but as far as I could tell, she was still upstairs in her room. I suddenly felt hopeful. Hopeful that there was a logical explanation for all this. I decided that if nothing happened by 7:30, I would call her and surprise her. At 7:31, I stood up and smiled. I had indeed come to the wrong conclusion. I reaffirmed my promise to trust her. Without taking off my ridiculous hat, I walked across the lobby toward the elevator and the 8th floor. Suddenly, I froze, then turned away from the elevator. I recognized the voice talking loudly on the cell phone pressed to my ear. It was Markham. I hid behind a large houseplant. He was so engrossed in his phone conversation that he didn't notice me. Through the leaves, I saw him press the up button on the elevator. Another couple entered the elevator. I watched as the floor indicator stopped on the 3rd floor. Then it stopped on the 8th floor. I returned to the same niche where I had been sitting all day. I wanted to meet them face to face. But by 8 o'clock, they still hadn't shown up. It seemed like they had stayed home. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was going on. I just didn't know which room on the 8th floor they had checked into. I glanced at the shop in the lobby. I improvised. I asked the salesperson if they could deliver flowers to a guest. He replied that they certainly could. I gave him the name and asked him to deliver the flowers as soon as possible. He agreed, saying that they didn't have many orders. I gave the young salesman $20 to deliver the flowers as soon as possible. Then I took the elevator to the 8th floor. Next to the elevator was a small lounge area with a view of all the corridors where the rooms were located. I waited. I saw the young employee stop at the door at the end of the hallway. I counted, 5th door on the right. There was a brief exchange and muffled conversation while the order was delivered. I walked into the opposite hallway when the employee left. Now I knew the room number, 809. I took the elevator down to the 1st floor and used the phone in the lobby. I asked for the cleaning lady. "Could you bring some clean towels to room 809? I asked. I stood by the elevator on the 8th floor again. This time it took a little longer. I heard the elevator bell ring, indicating that it had stopped on the 8th floor. Then, I heard the clatter of the cleaning lady's trolley as she made her way to room 809. There was a short knock, and the cleaning lady called out, "Room cleaning." I silently positioned myself directly behind the cleaning lady. I saw her take out a key and open the door, holding towels in her hands. That was enough. I rushed past the surprised concierge and saw Mitch Markham peering into the room through a short hallway. "Huh?" he said, finally realizing who it was. "Pat, who are you?" he asked in surprise. "What?" Mia exclaimed, alarmed. She hadn't seen me yet. Markham moved toward me, holding out both hands with his palms down in a gesture to stop me. The anger building inside me pushed me forward, and my right fist slammed into the soft fabric of his stomach. He collapsed to the floor in a sitting position. I stepped over him and saw Mia on the bed. I also noticed the flowers on the bedside table. "Patrick!" she cried out. I just stared at her, trying to understand what was happening. Even after I called housekeeping, I still had a faint hope that I would burst into the room and see them fully clothed, looking over sales charts. No, there was only one explanation for what had happened. It was obvious. While I watched, Mia began to list the typical ridiculous excuses. It wasn't what I expected. It was just the first time. It was just sex. She loves me, and so on. Despite the emotional outburst, I didn't forget to grab my phone and take a few pictures. Taking one last look at Mia, who was sobbing and begging for forgiveness, I turned to leave. "Don't you dare!" I hissed. "Come back to my house." As I walked away, I heard her sob, "I'm sorry, but where am I supposed to go? This is my home." I didn't say anything. To be continued. All the way home, I decided I wasn't going to be a nice guy. All the feelings of betrayal and lies came flooding back. I remembered how I felt a few years ago when I saw her and Langley together at that party. It was just like then, only worse. Much worse. I had a bunch of texts and voicemails from her. On Myron's advice, I saved them all. "We might need them," he told me. As soon as I arrived, I told her mother everything. She had become such an integral part of the family, helping with Michael and the twins, that I couldn't think of how to explain Mia's absence. Besides, it felt good to humiliate Mia and blame all her misfortunes on her mother. Her mother was in shock. The next call was to Lisa Markham, Mia's good friend. She was furious. I told him last time that if he did that again, it was over. Last time? Again? Markham was clearly in unfamiliar territory. Of course, this couldn't help but affect Mia and Lisa's long-standing friendship. Okay, I thought, I know I'm being vindictive, but I couldn't help it. I was furious. And besides being furious, I was hurt, terribly hurt, for what she had done to me, and, more importantly, for how it would affect the children. We were taking them away from the loving home they shared with their parents and into a world of shared custody, less stability, financial problems, and partial parenting. Mia respected my wishes and didn't show up at the house, at least not at first. That was on Sunday. I took the kids on a short hike in the mountains. When we got home, everyone was tired and hungry. Mia was sitting in the kitchen. The kids, who had been asking, "Where's Mommy?" the whole time, gathered around her. Despite everything, there was no denying that Mia was a good mother, and the children missed her. As she interacted with the children, hugging them and playing with them, I noticed that she was watching my expression, glancing at me quickly to gauge my emotions. I remained calm, a stone Buddha, with an impassive face. Mia made a delicious dinner for the children and me. There were moments when even I felt normal. But there was no escaping the dark cloud of dishonesty and betrayal, invisible to the children, that hung over our family. The rest of the evening, Michael and the twins got ready for bed. In our family, it didn't take long. Bath, pajamas, bedtime stories, and finally, sleep. I sat in the living room with the TV off, waiting for the confrontation I had been avoiding. I knew the time had come. Mia quietly entered the living room and sat down on the edge of the only chair opposite me on the couch. At first, she silently studied my face. Finally, taking a deep breath, she began to apologize. "I owe you an explanation," she finally said. "My mom and grandmother drummed into my head that sex is only for marriage." I had heard it all before. I thought it was Langley's explanation. Then she told me how she had fallen in love with Mitch at school. When they started working together, they became close. One thing led to another, and as she explained, they started sleeping together. "But I'll never do that again. I'll do anything you want. Please, 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 Patrick. I'll even quit my job," she said to me. "Don't do that," I replied. "No?" she asked, looking confused. "You'll need the money." Mia fell silent. She seemed to be realizing the practical consequences of her actions. This house, our lifestyle, our plans for the children's future, all of that would change. "Patrick, I love you. Isn't there any desire in your heart to forgive me? Please," she begged. "I'm not sure you understand what you've done," I said, and she tried to interrupt me, but I muttered, "I'm sorry. Maybe in time the children and I will forgive you. I just can't trust you anymore," I told her. "The children?" she asked. "Why are you talking about the children?" I leaned back in my chair and stared at her. I was amazed at how such an intelligent woman could not understand what she was talking about. "Mia," I said, "you didn't just ruin my life, you ruined the children's lives." She sat there looking at me with a question in her eyes. Joint custody, 2 different homes, potential adoptive parents, financial ruin. "That's the world they're facing because you had fun with Mitch Markham," I told her. Her face contorted. She was finally beginning to realize the full consequences of her actions. Through her tears, she begged for forgiveness. "You loved me enough to marry me," she sobbed. "Can't you find that love again?" "The truth is, Mia," I told her, "I married you because you were pregnant with our child. I wanted to give that child, Michael, a secure future. And you destroyed everything. If you hadn't been pregnant, I would never have married you. I didn't waste any time." She needed to feel as bad as I did. "No, Mia," I continued. "You weren't the woman I wanted to see as my wife. Sure, we had a good time together. But life, especially the life of parents, comes with certain responsibilities. Those responsibilities include raising your children responsibly so that they become productive members of society. I wasn't sure you would take on that responsibility," I continued. "But you surprised me. I have to say, you're doing a great job as a mother. Although I can't say you're a particularly good wife. I'm tired. I'm going to sleep on the sofa bed in the basement. Good night." "Patrick, I'm sorry," she sobbed. "One more thing," I said, ignoring her apology. She looked at me hopefully. "You should probably get a lawyer," I told her. I could hear her sobbing as I walked down to the basement. Next part. Somehow, life went on, almost as if her betrayal had never happened. Almost. We still lived together under the same roof. For the children, their world was normal. Mom, dad, and kids living together. Maybe they didn't notice that I rarely spoke to Mia, and there was absolutely no physical contact between us. No hugs, no hands holding hands, no goodbye kisses, almost no conversation unless it was absolutely necessary. That doesn't mean Mia didn't try. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, she apologized again and again. I responded to any attempts at physical contact with rejection and closed my eyes. We lived in two worlds. One world was when the children were awake, and we tried to maintain the appearance of a normal life. When Mia and I were alone, there was a cold war between us. It wasn't the most pleasant environment. It was a dark period in my life, and things only got worse. No, our dysfunctional family continued to exist, but there was something else that clouded the atmosphere of my life. It was Ryan. He was in hospice care. The doctor said he had days to live. I visited him, and Teresa did everything she could to keep his spirits up. But it doesn't take much to destroy a facade of positivity. One day, toward the end, I was sitting with Ryan when he dozed off. I was silent just sitting there when Ryan suddenly grabbed my shirt sleeve with force. I looked at him, and for a moment his eyes cleared. "Promise me," he whispered. "Patrick, promise me." He repeated it. "Anything." I nodded, ready to do whatever it took. It took him a few moments to gather his strength, but finally he whispered, "Take care of Teresa." I promised him I would. 3 days later, Ryan died. The funeral was sad and joyful at the same time. I spoke briefly about our friendship and what a good man he was. And then life went on. Or so it seemed. The house had a childlike atmosphere. Mia continued to be a good mother. On my advice, she kept working at Langley Motors, and Mia's mother came to our house regularly. My job was to maintain a normal environment for the children, but behind the scenes, some things were happening. That Tuesday evening, I met with Myron Overby to discuss options for ending the marriage. What he told me did not inspire optimism. Next, Mia was under constant stress. The only relief she got was from brief periods of sleep caused by exhaustion. Even the joy of interacting with her children was stressful for her. Mia constantly pushed herself to work. "If I'm not a good mother, Patrick won't need me." Mia remembered the terrible conversation she had with Patrick after that awful trip to Denver. He was so cold. He told her that if she hadn't been pregnant, he would never have married her. It was a sharp knife that hit its target. He accused her of destroying their future, their stability, and their children's happiness with her actions. She was constantly pressured to fix her mistakes. She had to fix her mistakes by becoming the best mother she could be. And it wasn't easy. She tried to talk to Lisa, her best and oldest friend. But Lisa lashed out at her with insults and said she had ruined her marriage. In the end, she said she didn't want to talk to her anymore. Fortunately, she kept her job at Langley Motors, but she was called into Blake's office and told that she was not to have any contact with Mitch. Mitch was demoted, and Mia noticed that he was now avoiding her. It was probably for the best, but the whole company knew about her affair with Mitch. She knew about it and had even heard some hurtful gossip. It was humiliating. If she had a choice, she would have quit, but Patrick said she needed the money. The only person she could really talk to was her mother. With her, she could discuss her actions and her unstable marriage. But although her mother got along well with the children and was a good cook, she didn't understand the situation. "Patrick will come around. In time, he'll learn to forgive you," she told Mia. To Mia, that seemed incredibly unlikely. Mia summed up her life as follows: an unhappy marriage, an awkward situation at work, and constant pressure at home to be the perfect mother. And all because she had had an affair with a man who, looking back, she didn't really like. And by the way, he was married to her former best friend. Next part. "You'll probably be granted joint custody," Myron told me. "But it's also likely that if you leave the house, your wife will retain the right to live there. If you sell the house, the proceeds will be divided, and you'll probably each have enough to buy a small house or apartment." I sat there thinking. I loved that house. It was perfect for the kids. They'd already started making friends in the neighborhood. The school they went to was also nearby. I remembered how we bought the house and how perfect it was for our family. I continued to sit in Myron's office, tapping my fingers absently on the table and thinking about the many wrong decisions I had made in my life. The thought of taking my children away from their home and forcing them to live in some cramped apartment haunted me. "There is another option," Myron paused. "It's becoming more popular, but Given the circumstances, it's not ideal. I looked at him and nodded silently for him to continue. Myron said he could draw up a prenuptial agreement after the wedding. Of course, I had heard of prenuptial agreements, but not like this. Myron explained that it was a document for spouses that spelled out a series of legal agreements between a husband and wife that protected them financially and personally. What should be in this document? I asked. He explained that it would be whatever we both decided, but it would be a decision about children and a home. Essentially, we would remain married. Financially, we would have our own accounts, investments, and pensions. Monthly expenses would be divided proportionally to our incomes. In a few years, when the children are older, we would split the expenses for the house equally. Specifically, when the twins turn 18, the house will be sold and the proceeds divided equally, unless we both decide to keep it. But if one of us wants to leave, the house will be sold. Another thing that will happen at that point is that either of us will be able to dissolve the marriage without objection. The property will be divided in half, and either of us will be able to buy out the other's share of the house at a reduced price. Otherwise, everything will be divided as described above. We will live as spouses living together. In addition, conditions regarding guests will be agreed upon. Neither of us will have the right to bring a partner into the house. Any extramarital romantic relationships must remain private, without discussion with the spouse or children. We discussed it again. It wasn't an ideal solution, but it was probably the least bad option. I asked Myron to make something while I thought about it. Maybe someday, much later, when the children were grown up, they would understand the sacrifices we had made for their stability, I thought. Next part, I couldn't believe it. When Patrick walked into the kitchen with a large envelope, I thought it was divorce papers. When he spoke, tears welled up in my eyes and I realized I was wrong. It was a different document. The gist of it was that we would both stay in the house. He would finish building the room in the basement next to his office, and that would be his bedroom. At least for now. We would remain married but live as roommates. There were many more details, but we would only learn most of them years later. I wasn't going to worry about that now. By then, I would surely have a chance to change something. This was my lifeline. I gladly agreed to a whole set of rules and conditions. In fact, I didn't even read them all the way through. I signed the document before Patrick finished explaining everything. Outwardly, I was happy because we wouldn't have to split up the children or sell the house. Secretly, I hoped I could get him back. I remembered how we broke up right after college. I managed to get him back then. I felt like I had a chance to do it again. Next part. At first, it was a little awkward. I was still very angry at her for cheating on me. Seeing her every day and acting normal was unpleasant. Although I treated the children with warmth and love, I tried to ignore Mia as much as possible. I set aside a place in the basement next to my office and furnished it as a bedroom. The children didn't notice anything unusual, and their lives continued peacefully, unaware of the crack in their parents' relationship. That was the agreement between Mia and me, and it was written into the marriage contract. The priority was the future and happiness of our children. We both had to pay the price to keep them alive. One of the problems was that it wasn't easy to meet people. I quickly discovered that one of the first questions potential women asked me was, "Are you married?" Before I could even finish my second sentence, which began with yes, but the woman was already walking away. The only potential option was someone I already knew well and who was patient enough to understand the situation. Unfortunately, there aren't many people like that here. Of course, one of the sacrifices I had to make was not having a relationship. Over time, this became more and more difficult. To be continued. Patrick was still a little angry. Although we did everything together as a family and usually had dinner together, he seemed to focus all his attention on the children. It was fine while it lasted, but I wanted our old life back, when we were together. No big deal, I thought. I was playing the long game. I had time. I had been through this once before and knew him so well that I was confident I could get him back. And I had a strategy. To be continued. On Fridays, I usually met up with a couple of single friends at Red Cab, a sports bar with an upscale lounge for meeting people. The guys and I liked the place because of the big screens and the random attractive women who also liked it. The problem was that most people who knew me, and there were quite a few, knew I was married. When I tried to explain that my wife and I had an open marriage, it sounded even more disgusting. Suffice it to say that all the women who knew about my situation and might have been interested in me generally showed no interest in me. It reminded me of Groucho Marx's old line, "I don't want to belong to any club that would have me as a member," or something like that. In many ways, it was frustrating. Next part. Several months passed and I was still playing this game at home. Yes, I understood that my children came first, but I felt that things were also improving with Patrick. He wasn't as rude to me when the children weren't around, and I noticed that he was paying attention to me. I was sure he found me attractive. He always had. I was also sure he didn't have anyone else. Of course, I wasn't sure, but except for Fridays, when he sometimes went to the caboose, he was usually home in the evenings. I started to make a plan. I knew that after a couple of drinks, he was usually only interested in one thing. Of course, I knew his habits from when we were married. It was Friday night when he left with his friends for the red caboose. I was wearing only a towel, as if I had just taken a shower. I knew he usually came home around 11 or 11:30. Looking out the window, I saw an Uber turn onto our street. I hurried to the refrigerator. I strategically placed the corner of the towel in the refrigerator and closed the door. I grabbed a bottle of water. I waited. I heard the door open and knew I had to hurry. I heard him come around the corner and enter the kitchen. "Oh," I said, startled, and stood up from my hiding place in the refrigerator. "Oh, you scared me," I said to him. He walked over to me silently and we sat down at the table. To be continued. Everything went smoothly. Except for that time I caught her in the kitchen on Friday. Our relationship was platonic. She was still a beautiful woman, but I needed something more in a relationship. All my close friends knew about Mia and my situation. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and suddenly the dysfunction in our lives became the norm. I treated Mia neutrally but pleasantly, and she was very kind to me. Months turned into years. Mia's mother continued to help us, and Mia continued to work at Langley Motors quite successfully. The children went to school and life went on. Suddenly, I noticed a pleasant change in my life. It was so unexpected that it surprised me. Next part. Time passed, but I enjoyed life. I loved my children, and now that the twins were in school, my life was normal and I felt happy. Work was great. Mitch had moved to California, and I no longer had to deal with him or remember my mistake. I needed to fix my relationship with Patrick somehow. Lately, he seemed to be in a better mood, happier. Sometimes, when all the guys were busy, it was just the two of us. He was nice and friendly, but avoided any physical contact. He stopped going to caboose with his friends. He started spending more time at home. He began going out in the evenings, leaving the house after dinner for a couple of hours, 2 or 3 times a week. I asked him where he was going, and he replied, "Just around the neighborhood." It didn't bother me. I was glad he wasn't hanging out with girls at the bar. The positive mood continued. His elevated mood coincided with his new habit of going to the bar and coming back. My mood mirrored his, and I was happier. He was friendly and good-natured with me. I thought things were working out between us, slowly but surely. On rare occasions, he kissed me goodbye, more like a gentle kiss on the cheek, like a sister. From time to time, I tried to turn to touch his lips with mine, but he dodged and just laughed a little as if it were a joke. I was disappointed with the stagnation in my relationship with Patrick, but on the other hand, we were still living together. My mom also encouraged me. She calmed me down with positive comments. "Sometimes things take time," she said, "but I can see that he cares about you." Her words always encouraged me. I just hoped they were true. The years dragged on, and everything remained the same. Then, suddenly, as if overnight, Michael left for college and the dynamic in the house changed. The twins were busy with school, extracurricular activities, friends, and boyfriends. Patrick and I were busy with work. But one evening, Patrick said we needed to take a family vacation to celebrate the twins' graduation. We had never traveled together in all those years. This is progress, I thought. "I'd like to take your mom with us," Patrick told me. She was an integral part of our lives, and on the one hand, I was happy that Patrick was taking her with us, but on the other hand, I thought it might be a chance for us to get closer. 3 days later, when I got home from work, my mom was there. She seemed excited about something. Maybe that's why she interrupted me. "Did you know about this?" she asked with a big smile on her face. "About what?" I asked. She smiled and handed me a few printed pages. When we talked to the twins about vacation, they both agreed on Disneyland. Even though they were on the cusp of adulthood, They were still kids at heart, and that was where they wanted to go. Apparently, my mom had been looking through Patrick's papers while he was out of town. I looked through the documents for the trip to Southern California and the details of the trip to Disneyland. I knew all this, but what had gotten Mom so excited? I looked up. "Keep reading," she said. And at first I didn't understand. After Disneyland, they had further plans for the trip. Hawaii. I continued reading. The Hapuna Beach Hotel on the Big Island, for two. The trip was to take place immediately after the trip to Disneyland. A week in Hawaii. Finally, I understood what had gotten my mother so excited. It was a surprise trip for the two of us. There were no plane tickets in the printed documents, but the hotel and car rental had been booked. Suddenly, I was excited too. It was a surprise for me. "Mom," I began, "you need to put all this back where you found it." That evening, Patrick called me from a meeting. He said he wanted to talk to me about something but not on the phone. I gladly agreed. He said he would be home the next evening and suggested we have dinner at the Pasta House, a small Italian restaurant we often went to. I was thrilled. He'll tell me about his trip to Hawaii, I thought. To be continued. I got home on Friday's afternoon. Mia was still at work. I texted her, "I need to run to the store. Meet me at Pasta House at 6:30. I left the house jumping with joy. I was nervous and excited. To be continued. As I walked down the sidewalk toward the Pasta House, I saw him sitting at the counter. In the empty space next to him, I noticed that he was holding something, probably a document. It must be about the trip to Hawaii. I smiled broadly and sat down. I wanted to kiss him, but it was a little awkward, so I just sat down. "How was your trip?" I asked, and we chatted about trivial things for a few minutes. There was a pause and Patrick began to speak. To be continued. "Mia, as you know, our relationship over the years after the whole thing with Mitch has been unconventional, to say the least." Mia smiled silently and nodded in agreement. "But despite all the conflicts, we found a way to work things out. We both made sacrifices for the sake of the children's stability. And look at them now," I said with a smile. "Michael is graduating with an engineering degree. Cleo got into Stanford, and Claire is going to Notre Dame. We both have a lot to be proud of," I told her. At that moment, I leaned over, picked up the documents, and placed them on the table. Mia, still smiling, looked at the documents and her expression changed. She looked confused. "Now that the twins have finished their education, I have fulfilled the terms of our marriage contract. You are free to date anyone you want without worrying about the children. In 60 days, we will be officially divorced." She looked at me in shock. "Mia, you will always be a part of my life. There were times when I was very angry with you, but over the years I've mostly gotten over it," I told her. "I consider you a good friend," I said cheerfully. She stared at me, and her smile turned into a confused frown. "Friends? Divorce? Patrick, I love you," she almost shouted. "I don't want a divorce." I looked at her in confusion. "Mia, it's all in the prenup. Here it is," I said and handed her the documents. "You agreed to this. There's your signature," I said and pointed to the bottom of the page. "But what about the trip to Hawaii?" she asked, desperation in her voice. "Hawaii?" I asked, now confused myself. How did you find out about the trip to Hawaii?" She sat there without answering. "I'm going to Hawaii with Teresa," I told her. "Teresa!" she almost screamed. Next part. Right after Ryan died, I spent a lot of time with Teresa. Despite the difficulties I was having with Mia, I knew I had to be there for Teresa. For several months, I visited their house several times a week. I remembered the promise I had made to Ryan in those last days. But after a while, it started to weigh on me. I felt uncomfortable, and at first I didn't understand why. I know that in many ways it was because of my grief over losing my girlfriend, but it wasn't just that. My feelings for her had become romantic. I felt like I was betraying my late girlfriend, so I stopped visiting Teresa. Around that time, I started spending time at the Red Lodge. It was an empty period in my life. I didn't have any friends, and I remembered the time I accidentally met Mia. I knew right away that it was a mistake. I started living a different lifestyle, promising myself to be healthy. I focused on my children and work. Fortunately, both areas of my life were going well. Around the same time, I started walking several kilometers after dinner, 2 or 3 times a week. My route took me past Teresa and Ryan's house. More precisely, now it only took me past Teresa's house, but I couldn't help thinking about her when I walked by. One summer evening, as I was walking by, I saw her watering the flowers on the porch. We started talking, and she joined me. It became a habit, and we started walking together regularly. Since we spent a lot of time together, it was hard not to notice how attractive Teresa was. I told myself this over and over again. She was the wife of my good friend who had died. I remembered the promise I had made to him. Several years passed and I didn't see Teresa. According to my marriage contract, I didn't mix my family life with my friendship with Teresa. They were two separate things that weren't discussed. In fact, it was my family's secret. My love for Teresa grew, and our friendship became stronger. We got used to hugging each other goodbye. I had to constantly remind myself that she was Ryan's widow. One summer evening, we were out walking and it started to rain. We were far from her house, and by the time we got back, we were both wet and cold. "Open the wine," Teresa said to me, "and I'll take a quick shower." While I was fussing with the wine in the kitchen, I heard her say something from the hallway. "What?" I replied. I hadn't heard what she said. I said, "Bring me a towel. They're in the laundry room." As I walked to the laundry room, I had mixed feelings: attraction, guilt, and, of course, desire. I began. "Do you want me to leave this here?" I asked uncertainly. Instead of taking the towel, she grabbed my hand and pulled me into the bathroom. You can imagine what happened next. The next day, when I arrived at Teresa's, the atmosphere was awkward. It was mostly my fault. After 10 minutes of my strange behavior, she asked what was wrong. She asked what was going on. It was fortunate that our friendship was strong enough that we could discuss such matters. "I think I'm cheating on Ryan," I finally confessed to her. She fell silent and stared at me intently. "I want to tell you about one of our recent conversations," Teresa began. She told me that Ryan had told her he felt guilty about her death. He felt like he had let her down. "Promise me you'll find a good man to spend the rest of your life with," he told her. She protested, saying that no one could ever take his place. Holding her hand, he slowly closed his eyes, then opened them with surprising strength and whispered, "Patrick." "You see," she said to me, "he already gave us his blessing." Next part. Several years passed, the twins were still in college, and an important day arrived for Michael. The marriage contract was drawn up without any problems. Myron had done a good job. Maya tried to protest, but the agreement was firm. Teresa and I got married. It was a modest ceremony. Teresa's brother, Tim, a good friend of mine, was my best man. I moved into Teresa's house. I still considered it Teresa and Ryan's house. I couldn't help myself. Mia stayed in our family home. Michael married his college girlfriend, Bridget. She was a wonderful girl, and I was happy for them. It was late in the evening at the reception. I found myself alone at a table, having had perhaps one too many glasses of champagne, and feeling quite content as I looked around at the guests. It was obviously a happy day for Michael, and I watched him dance with Bridget. Claire was dancing with her boyfriend, a big guy named Daniel who played soccer at Notre Dame. I liked him. Cleo was going to medical school and claimed she didn't have time for men. She was dancing alone next to her sister. Teresa was beautiful as always, and I could see she enjoyed being around people. I was in a good mood, feeling satisfied. Then I felt someone sit down in the empty chair next to me. It was Mia. I turned and looked at her. She had gained weight and her face showed signs of life's stresses. She had aged. "Having a good time?" I asked cheerfully. Ever since we had talked at Pasta House, our relationship had been strained. She acted as if she was angry with me. "Yes, I guess so," she replied. "I'm very happy for Michael. He's a good guy and he's marrying a wonderful woman." There was a pause in the conversation and everyone was lost in their own thoughts. Then I looked over and saw tears streaming down Michael's face. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Mia, you were a great mom," I said, trying to cheer her up. "Maybe a good mother," she said, not looking at me, "but not such a good wife." The end. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for new videos.